Chapter 11. Over the next 2 days, Elsie poured herself into learning everything she could to better function in the modern world. The machines were amazing. She conquered the washer and dryer first. On Thursday morning, Gabe said, "I'm going to do laundry. Would you mind getting the dirty towels for me?" "Dirty towels? None of them are dirty, Gabe." He smiled at her. "I know they aren't actually soiled, but I mean the towels and washcloths we've used." "Oh, okay, I'll get them." When she came out of the bathroom with them, he stood in front of the washer and dryer he'd said he was lucky to have. "So a washer must be for washing clothes and linens. How does it work?" "It's pretty easy. You put the stuff you want to wash in this bottom part. You don't want to pack it in or nothing will get clean." He showed her how much to put in. "Then you measure out the detergent." The detergent was a thick, bright green liquid he poured into the machine before shutting the door. "Then you select your water temperature. Hot water is for whites, warm water is for colors, but if the colors are very bright or the fabric might shrink, you use cold. Then you turn this knob to here and push it in." When he did that, the machine started to fill with water. For a few minutes she watched through the glass door in amazement. "What happens?" Gabe chuckled. "The laundry tumbles in the soapy water first. Then the machine pumps the dirty water out before filling with rinse water and tumbling some more. Then that water is pumped out and the drum spins very fast to get out as much water as possible. You'll hear when it starts." When the washer finished, Gabe moved the damp clothes to the dryer and showed her how to turn it on. Then he started another load in the washer. The dryer turned out to be even more remarkable. When the timer buzzed, Gabe opened the door to remove the towels. She picked up one of the towels and couldn't help but bury her face in it. It was delightfully warm and fragrant. "This is wonderful." She looked up to see Gabe watching her with a grin. "Yeah, laundry fresh from the dryer is one of life's simple pleasures." "I think I like doing laundry." Gabe laughed. "I'm sure that's the first time those words have ever crossed your lips." "I didn't like it before." "No, you hated doing laundry. A lot of your clothes had to be dry cleaned, so you went to a cleaner who also offered a fluff and fold service." "Fluff and fold?" "Yeah, essentially you paid to have everything laundered except your undies." "Undies?" "You know, underwear, bras and panties." "I can't imagine why I did that." She blushed. "I mean, I can see why I might not want someone else washing my undies, but it's so easy to do laundry. I can't imagine paying someone to do it for me." Gabe smiled. "You were always busy, always in a hurry. You didn't like spending time doing mundane things." Elsie shrugged. "Until I remember that I don't like it, I think I'll enjoy it." Gabe laughed. "Be my guest." In addition to the washer and dryer, Gabe also showed her how to use the stove, although she didn't really know how to cook the modern food she had. She wanted to learn, but he said it would be easier to do that after she could read, so she focused on reading. Then there was the television. As soon as she recovered from the shock of pictures that moved and talked, she became enthralled, and then bored. Gabe enjoyed sporting events and watched the Winter Olympics a lot. She didn't find it quite as thrilling. There were no tests of strength or sword fights, although sliding down the side of a mountain at breathtaking speeds did have its appeal. On Friday evening, after dinner was over and the dishes washed, Gabe said, "I'm going to watch some TV and then go to bed early. 7 Days of Days start tomorrow. Do you want to watch with me?" She didn't actually want to watch TV, but she did want to curl up next to him on the couch. They were watching snowboarding, and something occurred to Elsie. "Gabe, what do you watch on TV when there is no snow?" He gave her a puzzled look. "I'm sorry, what did you ask?" "Well, you called these the Winter Olympics. What do you watch on TV when winter is over?" "Elizabeth, there are lots of other things to watch on other channels. Do you want to see something else?" "I'd love to." He pushed buttons on the remote, and the image on the screen changed rapidly. He would stop for a bit every once in a while and watch for a few minutes before moving on. "There isn't much on." You're joking, right? You keep going past lots of things." He laughed. "You used to hate it when I channel surfed. But what I meant is the shows that are on will be hard for you to understand without a lot of explaining. Maybe there's an on-demand movie we could watch." He went to another channel that just had lots of words. He shook his head a lot before his eyes went wide, and he looked truly excited. "Star Wars. I love Star Wars. Do you want to watch that?" "It's something about war? I don't know." She couldn't imagine anything more gruesome. "No, it isn't real. It's science fiction. Basically, it's a story that's completely made up about faraway worlds." Elsie was dubious, but it had to be better than the Olympics or channel surfing. Gabe explained a few things as they started to watch, but oddly it didn't take much. After she watched for a bit, she began to follow the story. By the time it was over, she was completely enthralled. "Well, I'd start the next one, but it's really too late." "There's another one?" "There are 5 more." "And you'll watch them with me?" "Of course I will." She sighed contentedly. "I think sitting on the couch with you, watching a movie, is my new favorite thing." He smiled at her. "I had fun, too." "Did I like it before?" "I don't think we ever did it before. We were in medical school, and there was always work and studying to do. You rarely just kicked back and watched TV." "Well, I like it now." Gabe showed her how to use the remote and find shows. It turned out the range of entertainment available was both shocking and mind-boggling. There were channels devoted to everything from history to cooking. There were even shows to help children learn things. Gabe wrote down the numbers for the channels she liked, so she could find them if she wished to watch something while he was at work. Thus, by the time Saturday morning rolled around, she felt relatively comfortable staying alone while Gabe worked. Elsie awoke when Gabe had the next morning. After he left for work, she'd indulged in watching a little TV, but she also worked diligently to complete some pages in her workbook. Just after midday, she stopped to make a peanut butter sandwich for lunch. She had taken the first bite when the front door buzzer sounded. She wiped her hands and went to push the intercom button, as Gabe had taught her. "Hello?" "Good afternoon." "I'm sorry, Gabe isn't home at the moment." "I'm not here to see Gabe. I'm here to see you, Dr. Quinn. My name is Aldous Sinclair. I am David's father." "I'd rather not let someone in who I don't know." "I understand. That's a good rule to follow. But this is rather important. Perhaps I could get David on the phone, and you'll feel better after speaking with him." She thought about it for a brief moment. He was David's father, so what harm could there be? "No, I don't suppose that's necessary." She buzzed him in. A few minutes later, the doorbell to the apartment rang. She looked through the peephole and smiled to herself, remembering what Dr. Rose had said. The well-dressed man waiting for her to receive him was indeed a slightly shorter and older version of David. The man standing directly behind him, though, was huge and a little scary. Elsie opened the door. "Good afternoon, Mr. Sinclair. It's nice to meet you. Please come in." "Thank you, Dr. Quinn. It's lovely to meet you, too. This is Dixon, the head of my security team." "Good afternoon, Dixon." "Good afternoon, Dr. Quinn." "What exactly is a security team? Something like guards?" Mr. Sinclair smiled. "Yes, that is precisely correct. The members of my security team are my guardsmen. Dixon doesn't like to let me out of his sight, but he will wait just outside the door." "He's welcome to come in." "That is kind of you, but there are some things I want to discuss with you privately. Thank you, Dixon." Dixon inclined his head and shut the door. Elizabeth couldn't imagine what Mr. Sinclair had to discuss with her, and it made her a little nervous. "Can I offer you a cup of coffee, or tea, or maybe a peanut butter sandwich? I was just making one for myself." "A peanut butter sandwich and a cup of coffee sound wonderful." He followed her to the little kitchen. "I like my bread toasted." "So do I." She popped 4 slices of bread into the toaster oven. "We have strawberry or peach jam. We also have fluff, Gabe loves it. I think it is atrocious, but he assures me that other people really do eat fluffer-nutters, as he calls them. Mr. Sinclair chuckled. Well, he's right. People really do eat them. I think David was fond of them as a youngster. But I'm with you. I don't care for fluffer-nutters either. Peach jam would be perfect. That's my favorite. They exchanged small talk while she finished making lunch and laid it out on the little dining table. Please sit down. After you, Dr. Quinn. Just call me Elizabeth. I don't exactly remember how to be a doctor anyway. No, I don't expect you do. He took a bite of his sandwich. It has been ages since I've eaten a peanut butter sandwich. Sometimes they really hit the spot. Elizabeth took a nibble from her sandwich, then a sip of coffee. She couldn't help but wonder why he was here. You said you had some things to discuss with me. Yes, I do. First, I want you to know that I have known Dr. Rose for years, since we were very young men. He would never break a patient's confidentiality. I only know you're seeing him because David told me. Over the years, Dr. Rose has occasionally suggested that someone contact me. Why is that? I have a little experience with memory loss. That's why I'm here. David told me about your accident and amnesia. However, he doesn't know I've come to see you, and I would rather keep it that way. But when you were downstairs, you said you'd call David if it would make me feel better. It was a bluff. I was hoping you wouldn't ask me to. Elizabeth frowned. Why? Because there are some things that are better kept secret. The pocket watch is one of them. The pocket watch? You know about it? Yes, I do, because I chose to use it too. I'm a time traveler. I didn't actually choose to use it. What do you mean? Elizabeth accepted the watch, but something unusual happened. Evidently, she had the watch in her hand at the time of the accident. Our souls changed places when she hit her head and lost consciousness instead of when she went to sleep, and she dropped the watch. With the watch here and her in the past, time became equal. Mr. Sinclair looked amazed. I have met a few time travelers over the years, but I've never heard of that happening. It seems that I hadn't done the thing that would have resulted in my death yet. Gertrude thinks that might be part of the reason things didn't happen as they normally do. Why would that be part of it? As I understand, my laird intended to ask me to do something terribly dishonest and cruel. I wouldn't have done it, and he'd have whipped me, causing my death. Gertrude also thinks things might have happened differently because my choice was morally right. Your laird? You came from Scotland? Yes. But if you hadn't refused to do the dishonest thing, does that mean Elizabeth did? Elsie smiled. Yes, but it was neither cruel nor dishonest for her. Quite the opposite. My laird intended to pass me off as an expert midwife to someone who desperately needed one. I was only an apprentice, but Elizabeth is an obstetrician. Brilliant! Mr. Sinclair laughed. Elsie smiled. There is a certain elegance to it. That there is. You said you used the watch. Did you go backward in time? No, I came forward. Like me, but you stayed. Yes, I did. How long have you been here? Nearly my whole life. In my time, I was a young man, just 21, but I landed in the body of 7-year-old Aldous Sinclair in the year 1948. A little boy? Yes. It seems he was a bit of a handful. A brat. The Sinclairs were wealthy and lived on a beautiful waterfront estate in Newport, Rhode Island. Wealthy people are often targets for criminals, so spiked wrought iron fencing enclosed the entire property. Aldous wasn't supposed to leave the grounds alone, ever. Being the defiant little monster he was, he disobeyed that rule and snuck away often. If the grounds were fenced, how did he accomplish that? There were plenty of trees on the property, some with branches that reached over the fence. He was in the habit of climbing one, crawling out on a limb, and dropping down outside the fence. The soul exchange occurred when he was climbing the tree on one of these excursions. I lost my grip and fell. It wasn't terribly far, but I bumped my head and, funnily enough, broke my left arm. She smiled at his reference to her broken left arm. What would have happened had you not exchanged souls? Gertrude was never specific about that. She said he might have slipped and impaled himself on the fence. She was there when I hit the ground. Elsie was appalled. Impaled? How horrible. Yes, and as it turns out, he had been injured many times doing the same thing. But had he made it to the other side that day, Gertrude implied something even worse might have happened. It didn't really matter which terrible fate would have been Aldous'. I was scared enough to never try that again. She told me what I needed to do and walked with me until we were inside of the mansion. My memory loss was attributed to the head injury. He smiled. It never returned. But Aldous was only 7. That's right. I have no memories of early childhood, at least of Aldous' early childhood. Most people's earliest episodic memories are from about the age of 3, so while I am missing these actual memories, over the years I've been told enough that there is really no gap for me. Of course I have my own memories, but they've faded some over the years. Why did you decide to stay? You were a grown man, thrust into the body of a child. That couldn't have been easy. I was a grown man, but I was a peasant, a commoner. I had no power, no voice, no opportunity to advance. Regardless of how bright I was, unless I had chosen the religious life, there was no future for me other than a life of physical labor that could be cut short in any number of ways. I was in the body of a child who had absolutely every advantage life could offer, and had essentially thrown it away. He had never been mistreated in any way. He had any toy or book he could possibly want. He was adored by his parents, and had servants who took care of his every need. He had very few limits on his behavior, but he wanted none. His only reason for leaving the estate was for sport, because it was a challenge. One simple rule, and he couldn't follow it. His life was over, and limitless opportunity stretched before me. I couldn't go back. Did you have a family? I did. I had a wife and a child. Do you know what became of them? He nodded slowly. Leaving them was my only regret. As soon as I learned to read, I searched every history book I could find to try to learn their fate. Unfortunately, it was so long ago that finding any surviving record of the lives of 2 inconsequential peasants was futile. Gertrude occasionally popped into my life. She always assured me that they were well, but she would never give me details. Each time I begged her to bring them forward, her standard answer was, "That isn't the way the pocket watch works." And that's all you learned? No, Elizabeth, if I gave up that easily, I wouldn't be where I am today. So what did you do? I started researching memory loss. I learned everything I could about it. I looked for news reports of people with amnesia and kept records. In almost every case I read about, the person's memory eventually returned. I hoped to find someone who, like me, appeared to have lost all memories permanently, because that person might be a time traveler. But up until college, I had never found a report of that happening. Then I met Gerald Rose. Dr. Rose? The same. He said you were old friends. We were assigned as roommates during our first year, and we instantly became close friends. He was amused by my fascination with amnesia and repeatedly tried to find out why. One Saturday night, early in our second year, I told him. About the pocket watch? Yes. Funnily enough, it turned out that he had been offered the watch once. Really? He didn't tell me. Where did he come from? He went back in time and returned. It happened just before he came to college. It's amazing that of all people, the 2 of you ended up as roommates. Not really. I suspect Gertrude had something to do with it. She nearly always has a hand in coincidences like that. The January after I told Gerald about my experience with the watch, something truly amazing happened. He and I were at a party. Judith Olivia Carson, a young woman we both knew casually, was there. She'd had a very loud fight with her boyfriend and stormed out of the party, intending to drive home. Although the public shouting match should have been a dead giveaway, no one knew she had been drinking heavily and was in no condition to drive. Evidently, she wasn't really in any shape to walk. High-heeled shoes and ice only made it worse. She fell, knocking herself out before she reached the car. When she came to, she made her way back to the party, but she wasn't Judith anymore. Gerald and I were the first people she ran into. Her head was bleeding, and she had no memory. We took her to the hospital, but recognizing the signs, specifically semantic memory loss, we asked her about the pocket watch before we got there. She was a time traveler? Yes, she was. As it turns out, after regaining consciousness, Judith would have gone on to the car. Had she driven off in the state she was in, drunk and with a head injury, she would have wrecked and been killed in the accident. She might have killed someone else, too. My goodness. As I suspect you are becoming aware, Gertrude doesn't just give the pocket watch to someone for a lark. There are always reasons. So where was the woman from? My village. She was my wife. Elsie was amazed. Gertrude gave her the watch after all? That's wonderful, but what about your child? That was the heartache of it all. There had been a terrible sickness passing through the village that winter. Joe was dreadfully ill and dying when Gertrude gave her the watch. Accepting the watch meant she could have 60 days with me and, under normal circumstances, could return 60 seconds later to be with our child. But in this case, even if she had done that, the outcome would have been the same. She would have died within hours of her return. So she stayed here? Yes, but our child has weighed heavily in our hearts all of our lives. You've never learned what happened? No. As I mentioned, when Gerald encounters someone who's used the watch to travel through time, he puts them in touch with me. I keep hoping to meet someone who traveled to or from my era, who might know something. How do they find him? Mr. Sinclair smiled. Gertrude, of course. As you can imagine, traveling with the watch can result in having to make some heart-rending decisions. It helps to have someone who understands and can assist a returning traveler in coming to terms with their decisions. So, when needed, Gertrude sends them to Dr. Rose. Have you ever met anyone who knew what happened to your child? No, but that's why I'm here. Would you tell me your story? Maybe you're the link I've searched for. Where did you come from? The Scottish Highlands, in the year 1279. Joe and I came from the Highlands, too. You're the first person who I've ever encountered from that far back. I left in 1260, and my wife in 1268. What clan do you belong to? I'm a McCrae. Aldous Sinclair went white. We were McCraes. Maybe you knew our daughter. Surely you did. How old are you? In your own time, I mean. 21. Aldous frowned as if concentrating for a moment. That means you would be about her age. What was her name? Elsie. Chapter 12. Could this be possible? Could this man really be her father? Elsie didn't want to get her hopes up. Did you have a cousin named Dolina? Yes, I did. Do you know her? Do you know Elsie? Sir, I am Elsie, the daughter of Dolina's cousin Alder, but my mother's name was Jocelyn, not Jo. Not only that, my father died only 19 years ago, and my mother 11 years ago. You can't be my parents. Oh, my sweet girl, time travel doesn't work that way. Things aren't equal. Your mother joined me 8 years after I left, but I had been here for 13 years. Time isn't linear, and it only seems to connect at certain points. 19 years have passed for you since I left, but I've been here for 58 years. I was Alder, and Jo was my nickname for your mother, Jocelyn. Tears filled her eyes. You're really my father? His eyes were bright as well. I really am. He stood and opened his arms. Completely bewildered, Elsie stepped into the embrace, returning it. She could no longer suppress her tears. Oh, my darling girl, please don't cry. I'm so very sorry I abandoned you. I was young, and the opportunities this world offered, but I never should have stayed. You're wrong. Mama was able to come here because you stayed. Illness would have taken her from both of us had she not accepted the watch, not to mention all the other lives who would have been affected. But you were left alone. I wasn't alone. I had Dolina. I can understand your choice. Things here are truly wonderful. You said it a moment ago. In our time, commoners have no power, no voice, and no opportunity to advance. You've used your gift to do great things. If Elizabeth hadn't changed souls with me, I would have been beaten to death by my laird, simply because I wouldn't perpetuate a cruel lie. Da, I understand your choice. His arms tightened around her, and she felt him tremble, tears spilling down his cheeks. Your mother and I have always loved you, Elsie. After a moment he released her. They sat back down, but he took one of her hands in his. To honor you, we started a charity here to provide college tuition to young women in need. For years your mother attended the college graduation of every girl who received the scholarship. There are simply too many now. Mamma is still here? I thought maybe since you came alone— No, your mother is very much alive. However, I've never told her of my attempts to find out what happened to you. She doesn't know I've met so many time travelers. I never wanted to raise her hopes, only to dash them. It's been hard enough for me. Can I see her? Will you take me to her? Of course you can see her, my darling. I would like to take you to her now, but I wouldn't want to take you away without Dr. Soldani knowing where you were. I imagine he calls to check on you when he can, and he would worry if you weren't here. Does he know? Can you call and tell him? No, I haven't told him about the pocket watch, and you're right, he does call often. So it would be nearly impossible to explain to him why you were going anywhere with me. I suppose it would be, but I may not have much time here. I want to spend as much as I can with you both. Her father's face fell. I had just assumed you would want to stay. She smiled sadly. It's not my sole decision to make. Ah, that's right. I'd forgotten about Elizabeth. Elsie's heart ached. I doubt she will want to stay in the past. You know what it's like there. She is a modern woman and a doctor. She belongs here. Besides, I think my mission is to repair the relationship between Gabe and Elizabeth. The feelings I have, well, I'm certain we, or rather they, belong together. There's also someone in my time who's important to me. Her father nodded. I understand. The blessing your mother and I have been given by your presence here is priceless. We will accept what we have and rejoice in it, rather than mourn what we cannot have. She squeezed his hand. Elizabeth's parents had been such a disappointment. Elsie had felt sorry for her. She had lived most of her life without parents, but somehow having parents who were so detached seemed worse. Being given valuable time with her parents now, no matter how brief, was a gift beyond anything she could have ever hoped for. But it also hardened her resolve to help repair the relationship with Elizabeth's parents. She had the opportunity to give the same gift she had been given. I agree with all my heart. She smiled broadly. So when can I see my mama? I understand Gabe is working 12-hour days this week. Is that correct? How do you know that? He cocked his head and smiled. I'm a very wealthy man. I have contacts. Well, then, you know it's correct. Cheeky lass. She laughed. It's one of the wonderful things about the 21st century. I don't always need to hold my tongue. Then enjoy it while you're here. God knows you'll have to mind it well when you return. I know Gabe will be at the hospital every day until late in the evening, so I will tell Jo about you this evening. I expect she'll be here at the crack of dawn to see you, and I won't be able to get a word in edgewise. So, unless you have other plans, I'd like to spend the rest of the afternoon getting to know you. I'd like nothing more. Aldous did indeed spend hours with her. She learned that since he had been here for so many years, he had long since stopped thinking of himself as Alda. On the other hand, Jocelyn found it harder to think of herself as Judith. Since Jo was a pet name anyway, and Judith's first and middle initials were J.O., she started going by that name, and it stuck. She also learnt that they had 4 children. Caroline was their oldest daughter. She was 38, married, and had 3 children. 3 years younger than Caroline was Jennifer, who also was married and had 2 children. Xavier, their oldest son, was 32, and David was their youngest at 30. As Aldous told her about his other children, he became thoughtful. I want you to meet them, but we need to think about how best to handle this. Biologically, they are the children of Aldous and Judith Sinclair, and thus certainly not Elizabeth Quinn's siblings. But from a spiritual, philosophical standpoint, all 5 of you are the children of Alder and Jocelyn. I assume none of them know? Aldous shook his head. No one knows that I traveled here from the past except Dr. Rose and the other travelers I've met. Dr. Rose alone knows about Jocelyn. As advanced as things are in this century, there is no room for mysticism. Modern people believe in science. Every phenomenon must have a sound, logical explanation. Very few people are willing to accept anything on faith. Thus, if the story of our experiences with the pocket watch were to get out, your mother and I might be written off as lunatics. David is a friend of Elizabeth's. Maybe you can use the accident as an excuse. After all, both you and Mama have experienced amnesia. Actually, no one knows that about me. My parents kept it very quiet to avoid any sensationalism. I was young, and it was easy enough. It would have been impossible to keep Joe's accident a secret. Although it was so many years ago, much of the buzz died down before our children were born. It isn't a secret, but we never really discussed it with them. You're right, though, that may be just the thing. But first let's deal with Gabe. You can tell him that David informed me about your amnesia, and I thought it might be helpful for you to speak with Joe, but being cautious about my family, I wanted to meet you first. That will give you an excuse to spend time with your mother. That's a good plan, and it makes me feel better. I wasn't sure what I was going to tell him, but I didn't want to hide it from him either. Then you can come to our home to visit. That way I wouldn't have to leave members of my security team standing in the hall for ages. Oh, good heavens, I forgot. Dixon has been out there for hours. No, he hasn't. I'm certain when it became clear that I was going to be a while, he sent for backup, and they've been switching out. But it is getting late, and I should be going. Has Gabe taught you how to read numbers and use a telephone? Yes, and I'm learning letters, too. She couldn't keep the note of pride out of her voice. Only a commoner from her own time could appreciate the wonder of that. He smiled warmly. Excellent. He took out a small card and wrote a number on the back. This is my business card. If you call any of the numbers on the front, someone will answer, but it will not be me. In most cases, they can find me or take a message. However, if it is urgent, call this number on the back. It's my private cell phone number. Only a handful of people have this, and I always answer it personally. Why would I need to call you urgently? He smiled sadly. We don't know when Gertrude will come and tell you it's time to exchange souls again. I don't want you to leave without telling me. I want to be able to hug you one last time and say goodbye, and I know your mother will as well. Promise me. Again, the idea of her time here ending caused her heart to ache, but she nodded. I promise. He hugged her. And if you just want to talk to your da, call. That's urgent enough for me. He kissed the top of her head. She sighed. I'll see you tomorrow, Da. He smiled and kissed her cheek. Yes, my sweet girl. I'll see you tomorrow. When she shut the door behind him, she leaned against it for a moment, swallowing at the lump in her throat. She'd been given a tremendous blessing, time with a parent who she had thought was dead. She didn't want to seem ungrateful, but now the thought of saying goodbye forever in a few weeks was almost too much to bear. Thoughts of Geordie and the family they would have together were the only things that kept her from breaking down. Chapter 13. Although a 12-hour shift was supposed to be 7 to 7, Gabe rarely finished before 8 or later. He arrived home at 8:45 that evening to find Elizabeth sitting at the table, doing pages in her workbook. He kissed her. "I missed you today." "I missed you too." "How did you spend your day?" "I worked in this book a lot this morning, but I had a visitor this afternoon." Gabe was instantly wary. "A visitor? You let someone in?" "Yes, it was David's father, Aldous Sinclair." "Why on earth would David's father visit you?" "It seems that many years ago, David's mother had a serious head injury and suffered permanent amnesia." "Why didn't David mention that?" "I think it was long ago, when his parents were still in college. It wasn't really something they talked about much, and even then their children didn't fully understand the extent of it. He said memories sort of get filled in. People tell you so many of the important things that it feels like a memory eventually." "I guess I understand that. But why did he come instead of David's mother?" "He's cautious. He wanted to talk to me first. If it's all right with you, he's going to bring her to visit tomorrow." "That's fine. It's a good idea, actually, talking to someone who's experienced what you're going through." "I'm glad you agree. How was your day?" "Busy. I'm tired. I'm going to take a 45-minute power nap and then a quick shower." "If you're tired, why not just shower and go to bed for the night?" "I would, but tomorrow's Sunday. I missed Mass last week because of the snowstorm, and I can't go to a regular Mass working 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. tomorrow. But there is one church in the city, St. Malachy's, which has a very late Mass on Saturday nights. I usually go there on the weeks I work days." "I can't imagine many people go that late to Mass." "Actually, there are quite a few. The church is in the theater district. It's also called the Actors' Chapel. Mass is late so that performers and theater patrons can go after shows are over." "Can I go with you?" "To Mass? This late?" "You're going." "Yes, but you aren't even Catholic." "What do you mean? If I'm not Catholic, what am I?" She looked horrified. "You're Episcopal, but you didn't practice much of anything when we were in med school." "What's Episcopal?" "It's a Protestant religion." "No," she said vehemently. "I'm Christian, I know I am." "Sweetheart, Protestants are Christians too." This was another odd hole in her semantic memory. "It's just, well, it's really kind of a long story. Too long for me to explain now. I would love for you to come to Mass with me, if that's what you want." She nodded, but her brows were drawn together. "Don't worry about it. You'll like St. Malachy's." He kissed her before heading to bed. Gabe was too tired to think much more about it, but the power nap and shower revived him sufficiently. Normally he would have taken the subway, but he wasn't sure Elizabeth was up to that this late on a Saturday night, so he hailed a cab. Elizabeth was enchanted by the Gothic Revival church, dwarfed by the high-rise buildings surrounding it. Upon entering the church, she seemed to be a little surprised. "Is something wrong?" Gabe whispered. She shook her head. "No, it just isn't quite what I expected." He guided her into a pew. She didn't genuflect on entering the pew and glanced curiously at him when he did. Her insistence that she was Catholic confused him. Maybe she had become Catholic in the last few years. He guessed that she might remember her new faith and still have forgotten some of the rubrics. He lowered the kneeler, and Elizabeth knelt to pray beside him. But what she did next absolutely floored him. She made the sign of the cross and whispered, "In nomine Patris, et Filii, et Spiritus Sancti. Amen." Then she continued her whispered Latin prayers with the Our Father. "Pater noster, qui es in celis, sanctificetur nomen tuum, adveniat regnum tuum, fiat voluntas tua, sicut in cielo et in terra. Panem nostrum quotidianum da nobis hodie, et dimite nobis debita nostra sicut, et nos dimittimus debitoribus nostris. Et ne nos inducas in tentationem, sed libera nos a malo. Amen." And she ended with the Hail Mary. "Ave Maria, gratia plena, Dominus tecum, benedicta tu in mulieribus, et benedictus fructus ventris tui. Sancta Maria, Mater Domini nostri, ora pro nobis peccatoribus, nunc et in hora mortis nostrae. Amen. Gabe was nearly too stunned to say his own prayers. She couldn't read, she didn't remember being Protestant, and yet she prayed in Latin. Maybe she became Catholic and worshipped at a church that offered a Latin Mass. Honestly, it was the kind of thing the girl genius would do. He could almost hear her saying that if one was going to switch religions, one may as well learn another language at the same time. He thought he would ask her about it after Mass, but changed his mind. There was no getting around it. The things she remembered and didn't remember were bizarre, and pointing them out often distressed her. This was confirmed by the fact that she became confused at several points during the Mass, and it flustered her. It was better to just let it drop. In the cab on the way home, Gabe put his arm round Elizabeth and she snuggled against him, resting her head on his shoulder. This felt so right. It was even better than it had been in medical school. The idea that this could be his future, his forever, filled him with warmth. He kissed the top of her head, and she sighed. "How are your ribs feeling?" "They hurt a little tonight." He frowned. He had ensured that she iced them several times a day and took a non-steroidal anti-inflammatory whether she had pain or not. "Did you use ice and take the medicine I gave you?" "I did in the morning, but I forgot to while Mr. Sinclair was visiting." "And you didn't take the medicine and use ice after he left?" "No, I didn't think about it because I wasn't very uncomfortable." "Elizabeth, you weren't uncomfortable because you had been icing and taking the medicine regularly to keep the pain away. It takes 4 to 6 weeks for broken ribs to heal, and they can be quite painful for a while." "It isn't bad. I can stand it." "That isn't the point. When your ribs hurt, you move less, and you breathe less deeply. Those 2 things can result in other illnesses developing. Also, if you're already in pain, it may take stronger medicine to relieve the pain, and you don't like the way that medicine makes you feel." "I'm sorry, I didn't know that." "I know, and I should have explained it better. We'll take care of it when we get home. You should feel better by morning, and tomorrow you can get back on a schedule again. But if you're still hurting by noon, I want you to call me." "I will." "I mean it, Elizabeth. Even if the Sinclairs are visiting, you need to do it. They'll understand." "I will, I promise." "Speaking of the Sinclairs, your social schedule is filling up. They'll be here tomorrow, you and Dr. Rose are meeting your mother for lunch Monday, and you have your regular appointment with Dr. Rose on Wednesday." She laughed, looking up at him. 3 appointments in otherwise empty days is hardly a full schedule. "Well, just in case you get any more invitations, I want you to keep Saturday free for me. I won't schedule anything on a day you are off without checking with you. What are we doing on Saturday?" "It's a surprise. I think you'll like it." "I'm certain I will." Chapter 14. Again, Elsie woke early the next morning when Gabe rose for work. Although he told her to go back to sleep, and she tried, she simply couldn't. She was too excited at the prospect of being with her mother again, something she never dreamt would be possible this side of heaven. Still, it wasn't daylight yet, and it would likely be hours before the Sinclairs arrived. She got up and decided to take a shower. Gabe had said she could get the cast a little wet, but it might be more comfortable if she didn't. He had wrapped it in plastic wrap when she had showered earlier in the week. She found the box containing the thin, clear film and tried to do the same thing. It wasn't nearly as easy by herself with one hand, but she managed. By the time she had washed and dressed, the sun was up, barely. She remembered what Gabe had said about applying ice to her ribs and taking the pain medicine, so she did that and ate a little breakfast. Elsie had to find something to occupy her time, or she would go mad with waiting. She tried doing pages in her workbooks, but couldn't focus. Watching television didn't hold her attention either. Elsie had such wonderful memories of her mother. For years after her mother died, when Elsie longed for her so badly it hurt, she would close her eyes and relive a memory. Nothing extraordinary, for those only made her more keenly aware of her loss. She would relive something simple, like tidying the cottage or preparing a meal. That was it. Elsie would try to cook something. It would keep her busy, and she'd have something to serve her parents for the midday meal. She searched Gabe's kitchen for something she recognized. She found several cans that, based on the pictures, contained small white beans. He had shown her how a can opener worked when he opened a tin of ground coffee. She found carrots, celery, and an onion in the refrigerator. It wasn't easy with one arm in a cast, but she chopped the vegetables, put them in a big pot with some butter, and put it on one of the stove's eyes. She turned it on and stirred the contents until the onion was soft. She added water until the pot was about half full. She opened the cans of beans, but when she saw them, she wrinkled her nose. They were covered with a slimy liquid. She gave them a sniff. They didn't smell bad, so she tasted one. It tasted fine. They must eat them this way. She shrugged and dumped them in the pot. She found the salt and pepper. It still amazed her that salt was no longer valuable, and added some of each to the pot. She found some other small jars, some of which looked as if they contained dried herbs. She opened them, sniffing each jar to identify its contents. She added thyme and rosemary. She also added a white powder that she couldn't identify, but it smelled savory. She would have liked a nice meaty joint to flavor the soup with, but found nothing like that. She did, however, find a couple of cans of something that had a picture of a bowl filled with clear broth on the label. She opened one, sniffed it, and smiled. It was chicken broth. She added both cans to her pot. She wasn't sure what to do when the pot began to boil. At home she would swing the pot to the side of the fire, where there was less heat, and allow it to cook slowly for several hours. The dial controlling the eye had numbers on it. She turned it to 1 and watched to see what happened. Initially it seemed as if it didn't make a difference, but the boiling slowed to a low simmer after a minute or two. She smiled. That will work. Feeling pretty chuffed about her pot of soup, she decided to try one more thing. One of her mother's favourite things had been a pudding made of apples and raisins. There were apples in a bowl on the counter, and she had seen a box with a picture of raisins on the label in one of the cabinets. She needed milk, honey, and flour, all of which she had seen. She peeled and sliced 4 apples, put them in another pot with a few handfuls of raisins, and added water. She cooked them just until the apples were tender, and then drained the water off and mashed the fruit. She added milk and honey. She had found ginger and cinnamon in her search for seasoning for her soup, so she sprinkled in some of each. The last ingredient was the flour. She made a paste with a little bit of milk before mixing it in. Then she cooked it, stirring constantly until it became thick. She sat it on a cold eye to cool. Her mother would have put it on the window-sill, but she didn't have a refrigerator. Elsie smiled. When the pudding had cooled a little, Elsie put it there to chill. By 9 o'clock everything was done and the apartment smelled delicious. The buzzer for the front door sounded at 9:30, and Elsie ran to answer it. "Hello?" "Good morning, Elsie. It's Aldous Sinclair." "Good morning." She hit the button that unlocked the door. "Come in." She could barely stand the brief wait while they rode the elevator. She wanted to meet them there, but she knew the door would lock behind her if she left the apartment. By the time she found the key to take with her, they would be here and she wouldn't need it. Within a minute or so, a knock sounded at the door. She opened it. Maybe it was because she knew it really was her mother, but she had nearly the same intense feeling she'd experienced when she first saw Gabe. It was as if her soul recognized her mother's, in spite of her outward appearance. Elsie threw her arms round Joe Sinclair, so full of joy she could scarcely contain it. "Mama, it's you!" Her mother, eyes bright with tears, returned her embrace. "Oh, my sweet girl, you are so deeply embedded in my heart I would have known you anywhere." "Let's take this inside, ladies," said Aldous. Too late, Elsie realized this had played out in the open doorway. She glanced around quickly, but saw no signs of a guard. Her father chuckled. "I thought there would be no containing either of you, so I suggested that Dixon could keep an eye on things from outside the building. But still, it is better to keep from prying eyes." Elsie ushered them in, shutting and locking the door behind them. Aldous took a deep breath in through his nose. "Something smells wonderful." "I made a pot of soup for our midday meal." Elsie felt suddenly shy. She remembered that it had been many years since either of them had been in the 13th century, and they were wealthy. They were probably accustomed to finer fare. "You don't have to eat it if you'd rather not." "Nonsense," said her mother. "It is a perfect day for soup. In fact, if you have the ingredients, I can show you how we make bannock now. Is the kitchen this way? We can talk while we work." At this, Elsie burst into tears. Joe Sinclair gathered Elsie into her arms. "Sweetling, don't cry. What's wrong?" Elsie clung to her mother. Between sobs, she said, "Nothing. I've just missed you so very much, and this, just being with you and doing ordinary things, is what I've missed the most." "Well then," said her mother as she stroked Elsie's hair, "we shall have to do a lot of ordinary things together." When Elsie had regained her composure, she showed her mother into Gabe's kitchen. "I don't know if he'll have what you need. It doesn't take much. Turn the oven on first so it heats up. I'll show you how to make a kind of bannock they call soda bread. I'd normally use a whole-grain wheat flour, but this white flour will do." She looked through the cabinets and found a bottle with a brown liquid in it and a yellow box. "Vinegar and baking soda. Perfect. Is there plenty of milk?" Elsie pulled the plastic jug from the refrigerator. "It's half full." "That will be enough, but if Gabe is anything like my sons, he uses a lot of milk." She called into the front room where Aldous had turned on the Olympics. "Aldous, dear, have Dixon send someone to the store for milk. I don't want to leave an empty jug." He chuckled in response. "Certainly, Joe, but perhaps I should wait until you're done to make sure there's nothing else." "Suit yourself." Her mother showed Elsie how baking soda reacted to vinegar. "See how it foams up? That makes the bannock lighter." She added some vinegar to the milk, causing it to curdle. She stirred baking soda and salt into the flour. "Add the sour milk to the flour all at once, then work fast. You don't want to overwork your dough." As they finished making the bread, her mother asked questions about clan members, told Elsie about her other children, and just chatted as mothers and daughters do. That is how Elsie spent the rest of the day, talking with her parents, learning about their life, and telling them about hers. Along the way, she learnt so much more about modern life and the world. They answered every question and explained things she didn't comprehend. Her father had a laptop with him. He could pull up images of anything imaginable to help her understand everything from airplanes to the bottom of the ocean. She saw images of Scotland taken from a satellite. He pointed to the area where their clan had lived, but it was empty. Nearly all of the highlands were deserted. "What happened?" "That, my darling, is a very long, sad story. It won't happen in your lifetime, and since you intend to go back, it might not be something you want to know about." She nodded. "I suppose not." At their midday meal, her mother had been delighted with the apple and raisin pudding. "I haven't had one in years." The afternoon slipped into evening. Her parents insisted on taking her out to dinner. "Gabe left you with a cell phone number, did he not? And he knew we were coming?" asked her father. "Yes." "Then you can call him to let him know where we'll be. You'll likely be home before he is anyway." Truthfully, she didn't want the evening to end, and she could only serve them soup again. Besides, she would be eating in a restaurant tomorrow with Elizabeth's mother and Dr. Rose, so she wanted to know what to expect. "Okay, I'd like to go with you." When she dialed Gabe's number, she heard his voice say, "This is Gabe. Leave a message." He had taught her how to do that, so after the beep, she said, The Sinclairs are, taking me out to dinner, and, well, they don't expect we'll be out long, so, I'll see you later, when you get home." When she hung up, she realized her parents were grinning at her. She blushed. "How long before things like this stop feeling so bizarre?" Her mother laughed. "Months, even years. But I fell in love with some things right away, like the bathroom," they both said in unison before bursting into laughter. Amused, Aldous shook his head. "Come, ladies. Dixon and Jake have brought the car around." Gabe had been surprised to get the message that Elizabeth was going out to dinner with the Sinclairs, but when he returned home that evening and they were still there, he wasn't sure quite what to make of it. Elizabeth introduced them, and they exchanged small talk for a few minutes. She seemed perfectly at ease with them, which was nice to see. Soon Aldous said, "Well, I know you're probably tired and have to work again tomorrow, so we'll be going, Elizabeth. I know you said you were meeting your mother with Dr. Rose tomorrow. Would you like to spend the day with Joe on Tuesday? I can send a car for you." "I'd like that a lot. You don't mind, do you, Gabe?" "No, of course not." But he didn't quite understand why. As if reading his confused expression, Joe Sinclair said, "When you lose your memory, it's easy to feel unmoored, out of step. Sometimes just having someone around who understands and can help a little is comforting." "I'm sure it is, and thank you so much for helping Elizabeth with this. It is my pleasure, but very small in comparison to what you are doing for her." He put his arm round Elizabeth's waist. "I would do anything for her. I love her." Elizabeth blushed, but rested her head against him. Joe smiled broadly. "Clearly." Aldous took his wife's elbow. "We'll say good night, but we'd like to have you both to dinner. Are you free this weekend?" "We have plans on Saturday," said Gabe. "Then how about Sunday?" Gabe glanced at Elizabeth, who smiled up at him and gave a little nod. He smiled back. "Sunday is perfect." Mr. Sinclair nodded. "Excellent. I'll send a car for you around 5. "Send a car?" "We could just grab a cab." "Nonsense, I'll send a car." His tone brooked no refusal. The Sinclairs each shook Gabe's hand and embraced Elizabeth as they left. When they were gone, Elizabeth turned to face him, positively beaming. If this was what spending time with them did for her, he didn't begrudge her a minute. "I made soup, and Mrs. Sinclair showed me how to make soda bread. Would you like some?" He grinned. "I'd love some. I'm just going to take a fast shower first. I'll be out in 5 minutes." He gave her a quick kiss before heading to the bathroom. He didn't quite understand what had happened today. As he understood it, the Sinclairs had spent the entire day with Elsie. That seemed odd, but Aldous Sinclair was a client of her mother's. Perhaps he felt he owed it to Mrs. Quinn. Ah, well, he wouldn't worry about it. Elizabeth seemed relaxed and happy. The soup she made was delicious. His mother would have put pasta in it, but otherwise she would have approved. The soda bread was also very good, slathered with butter. That was one thing he was certain his mother had never made. "I've never come home to hot soup and fresh bread after a long day. I could get used to this." Elizabeth looked genuinely pleased. "I'm glad you like it. I like to cook, although it is a little hard with this." She motioned to her cast. "Speaking of that, did you use ice and take your medicine today?" "Yes, I did." "And how do you feel?" "I'm a little sore and tired, but not as bad as last night." "Good. You should ice it one more time before we go to bed." "I will. I'll just put things away first." "Leave it. I'll take care of the dishes and leftovers. Ice your ribs." "You're bossy." She leaned in, and to his surprise kissed him, igniting his desire. When she broke the kiss, he grinned at her. "You're stalling." "But I like kissing you." She kissed him again, fanning the flames. He gave in to the kiss for a moment. She was warm and sweet and wonderful. His right hand slid round her waist to pull her closer, brushing against her cast. "And she has broken ribs." With great effort he pulled away. "You're still stalling. Ice, now," he said with mock sternness. She pouted. "Okay." After he put the kitchen to rights, he joined her in the bedroom. She was wearing the beautiful but insanely impractical cashmere pajamas and lying with ice packs on her right side. She frowned at him. "You know, this kind of hurts." "I know, but it keeps the swelling down and makes it hurt less in the long run." "I believe you. Thousands wouldn't." "They always say doctors make the worst patients." Sadness flitted across her features for a moment. "But I'm not really a doctor, at least not now." "Your memories will return, sweetheart. I'm sure they will. But even if they don't, you know that doesn't matter to me." "I know, and you're right, my memories will come back soon." "That's the way to stay positive. Now, I think that ice has been on for at least 15 minutes. I'll put it away, and then I'm ready to sleep." When he returned to the bed, she curled up next to him. If he counted the night in the hospital room, and he did, this was the 8th night he had slept by her side. His desire for her grew with each passing minute. He wouldn't act on it, not until her ribs had been allowed to heal a little longer, but he hoped going to bed with her soon would mean more than just sleeping.